I was standing in my driveway staring at the massive red splatter across the cream-colored siding of my house when I realized this was going to be a nightmare to deal with. Paint. Someone had thrown red paint all over the side of my home facing the Miller's property, and it was already starting to dry in the Arizona heat. My name is Harrison Vance, and I had moved to this quiet neighborhood in Scottsdale about 18 months ago, thinking it would be the perfect place to settle down after my divorce. The houses were nice, the streets were clean, and the homeowners association seemed reasonable enough during the initial walkthrough. I should have known better. Nothing is ever that simple, especially when you have an HOA run by someone like Patricia Morrison. Patricia was the stereotypical HOA president. Mid-40s, blonde hair always styled in that speak-to-the-manager cut, and a clipboard that seemed permanently attached to her hand. She drove a white Lexus SUV with a bumper sticker that read, "Keep our community beautiful," and spent most of her days prowling the neighborhood looking for violations. In the past year and a half, I had received 3 notices from her. One for leaving my trash cans visible from the street for an extra 2 hours past pickup time. Another for a small oil stain on my driveway that I had already scheduled to be cleaned. And a third for planting flowers that were allegedly the wrong shade of purple, according to the approved color palette. But this paint situation was different. This was actual damage to my property, and I had a pretty good idea who was responsible. The Millers lived next door with their 12-year-old son, Tyler. I had caught him in my yard twice before, once throwing rocks at my fence, and another time letting his dog use my lawn as a bathroom without cleaning up after it. Both times I had spoken to his parents, Greg and Amanda Miller, and both times they had been dismissive, acting like their kid could do no wrong. Greg had actually laughed in my face the second time, telling me that boys will be boys and I needed to loosen up. I pulled out my phone and took about 30 pictures from different angles, making sure to capture the extent of the damage. The paint covered at least 100 square feet of siding, dripping down in angry red streaks that looked like something out of a horror movie. My hands were shaking as I documented everything, partly from anger and partly from the realization that this was going to cost thousands of dollars to fix. The smart thing would have been to call the police right away, but I wanted to be absolutely certain before I made accusations. I had learned the hard way that in HOA neighborhoods, you needed ironclad proof before making waves. So instead, I went inside and started researching security cameras. If Tyler Miller was going to escalate his harassment, I was going to be ready. Within 3 hours, I had ordered a complete security system. 8 cameras with motion detection, night vision, and cloud storage that kept footage for 60 days. The setup cost me almost $2,000, but I considered it an investment. The company offered installation within 48 hours, which meant I would have eyes on my property by Wednesday afternoon. In the meantime, I called my insurance company to start a claim and got an estimate from a contractor. The paint had soaked into the siding's porous surface, which meant the entire section would need to be replaced. The estimate came back at $4,500. Tuesday morning, I found Patricia Morrison standing in my front yard with her clipboard when I came out to get my newspaper. She was wearing pressed khaki pants and a polo shirt with the Neighborhood Association logo embroidered on it, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Harrison," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "I need to talk to you about the state of your home's exterior." I felt my jaw clench. "You mean the paint that someone threw all over my siding? Regardless of how it got there, it's creating an eyesore for the entire neighborhood." According to Section 12, Subsection 4 of our HOA bylaws. All homes must maintain their exterior appearance to community standards. I'm going to need you to have this cleaned up within 14 days or face fines. I stared at her in disbelief. Patricia, someone vandalized my property. I'm dealing with insurance and contractors right now. The repairs are going to take time. She made a note on her clipboard. I understand that this is inconvenient, but the rules apply to everyone equally. If you need an extension, you'll have to submit a formal request in writing to the board, and we'll review it at our next monthly meeting. The next meeting isn't for 3 weeks, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Then I suggest you work quickly. She tucked her pen behind her ear and started walking toward her car. Oh, and Harrison, I noticed your lawn looks a bit dry in some patches. You might want to adjust your sprinkler schedule. We wouldn't want another violation notice. I watched her drive away, my hands balled into fists at my sides. This was exactly why people hated HOAs. Instead of showing any sympathy or offering to help investigate who had vandalized my home, Patricia was threatening me with fines. I went back inside and immediately typed up a formal extension request, including photos of the damage and the contractor's estimate. I printed 3 copies, 1 for my records and 2 for the HOA, and dropped them in Patricia's mailbox that afternoon. The security cameras were installed Wednesday afternoon, just as promised. The technician, a guy named Marcus who clearly knew his stuff, spent 4 hours running cables and positioning the cameras to cover every angle of my property. We had cameras on the front door, the driveway, both sides of the house, the backyard, and 1 wide-angle camera that captured the street in front of my home. He showed me how to access the footage from my phone and set up motion detection alerts. "Man, that's some nasty vandalism," Marcus said as he worked on the camera covering the paint-splattered side of my house. "Any idea who did it?" "Suspicions," I said. "That's why I'm installing these." He nodded knowingly. "Smart move." We've been getting a lot of calls lately from people in HOA neighborhoods. Seems like there's always some kind of drama. He finished mounting the last camera and climbed down from his ladder. "Okay, you're all set. These babies will catch anything that moves within 50 feet. They've got excellent night vision too, so even if someone comes around at 3 in the morning, you'll get a clear picture." I thanked him and spent the next hour familiarizing myself with the system, watching the live feeds from different cameras and playing with the settings. The image quality was impressive. I could zoom in enough to read a license plate from across the street. If anyone came onto my property now, I would know exactly who they were and what they were doing. Thursday passed without incident. I went to work at the software company where I managed a development team, came home, grilled some chicken for dinner, and spent the evening watching the Suns game. My phone stayed quiet except for a few motion alerts triggered by a cat wandering through my front yard and the mailman making his afternoon delivery. Friday was when things got interesting. I was in a meeting at work when my phone buzzed with a motion alert at 2:15 in the afternoon. Then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, pulling up the camera app. The feed from the side yard camera showed Tyler Miller creeping along the fence line with what looked like a can of spray paint in his hand. He was wearing a black hoodie despite the 80-degree weather, clearly trying to conceal his identity, but I could see his face perfectly when he looked up to check if anyone was watching. My heart was pounding as I watched him shake the spray paint can and move toward my siding. He started spraying, creating large blue loops and swirls over the section that hadn't been hit by the red paint earlier. The little punk was actually grinning as he worked, clearly enjoying himself. The footage was crystal clear, showing not just his face but also the shoes he was wearing, some distinctive red and white Nike high tops that I had seen him wearing around the neighborhood before. I immediately saved the footage to my phone and the cloud backup, making sure I had multiple copies. Then I called the Scottsdale Police Department non-emergency line. The dispatcher took my information and told me an officer would be out within a few hours to take a report. I left work early, telling my boss I had an emergency at home and was back in Scottsdale by 3:30. Officer Jennifer Santos arrived at 4:15, a no-nonsense woman in her mid-30s who took one look at my house and let out a low whistle. "Wow, they really got you good." "Twice now," I said, gesturing to both the red and blue paint. The red was from Sunday night, and I just caught the kid on camera today adding the blue. I showed her the footage on my tablet, and she watched it 3 times, making notes in her report. "That's definitely clear enough for identification. Do you know who this is?" "Tyler Miller." "He lives next door." I pointed at the Miller house. "I've had problems with him before, but nothing this serious. His parents have been completely unhelpful." Officer Santos nodded. "Given that he's a minor, we'll need to contact his parents first. Would you like to press charges?" "Absolutely." "This is going to cost me thousands of dollars in repairs, and his parents need to understand that their kid can't just destroy other people's property." She finished her report and took a copy of the video footage. "I'll head over there now and speak with his parents. Someone will follow up with you within 24 hours about next steps. In the meantime, make sure you keep all your receipts and estimates for the damages. You'll need those for restitution." I watched from my living room window as Officer Santos walked up to the Miller's front door. Amanda Miller answered, and I saw her expression change from confusion to anger as the officer explained the situation. She kept shaking her head, clearly denying everything. Greg Miller appeared a moment later, and I could see him getting animated, his arms gesturing wildly. Officer Santos remained calm, pointing at my house and then showing them something on her phone, probably the video footage. The conversation lasted about 20 minutes before Tyler was brought outside. Even from my window, I could see the kid looked scared now, his earlier bravado completely gone. Officer Santos spoke with him directly while his parents stood by looking furious. Not at their son for what he had done, I noticed, but at the situation in general, probably angry that he had been caught. About an hour after Officer Santos left, Greg Miller came storming across our shared property line and pounded on my front door. I checked the camera feed first, then opened the door but kept the screen door locked between us. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Greg shouted, his face red. "Calling the cops on a 12-year-old kid. Your 12-year-old kid vandalized my house twice," I said calmly. "I've got video proof, and the damage is going to cost over $7,000 to repair at this point. It's just paint. Kids mess around sometimes. You didn't need to get the police involved. I asked you to talk to your son twice before about his behavior in my yard. You laughed it off both times. So yes, I did need to get the police involved because clearly you're not interested in parenting your child." Greg's hands clenched into fists. "You're going to regret this. I know people in this neighborhood. The HOA is going to make your life hell. The HOA is already threatening me with fines for the paint your son threw on my house, so they're already making my life hell. At this point, Greg, I don't really care what you think. Your kid committed vandalism. It's on video and he's going to face consequences." "We'll see about that," Greg spat, then turned and stormed back to his house. I closed the door and leaned against it, my hands shaking slightly. I had never been good with confrontation, which was probably why I had let things slide with Tyler before. But this was different. This was serious property damage, and I wasn't going to just roll over and accept it. Saturday morning, I received a certified letter from the HOA. Inside was a formal notice of violation regarding the unauthorized paint colors on exterior siding, and notification that if the issue wasn't resolved within 14 days, I would be fined $500 per week until compliance was achieved. There was also a note that my request for an extension had been denied by the board in an emergency meeting. I immediately called Patricia Morrison. She answered on the third ring, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Harrison, I was expecting your call." "Patricia, you can't be serious about this. I'm the victim here. Someone vandalized my property and now you're threatening to fine me. The bylaws are very clear. All exterior paint must be from the approved color palette. Red and blue spray paint are not approved colors." "I didn't paint my house. A kid vandalized it. That's a matter for you and the police to sort out. The HOA's only concern is maintaining property values and community standards. I'm sorry, but the rules apply to everyone. This is insane. You're punishing me for being the victim of a crime." "No one is punishing you, Harrison. We're simply enforcing the rules that you agreed to when you purchased your home. If you have concerns about the bylaws, you're welcome to attend our next board meeting and voice them. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other matters to attend to." She hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, staring at my phone in disbelief. This couldn't be legal. There was no way an HOA could fine someone for vandalism damage that wasn't their fault. I spent the next 3 hours researching Arizona HOA laws and found that, unfortunately, it was a gray area. Technically, the HOA could enforce aesthetic standards regardless of how the violation occurred, but there were cases where homeowners had successfully fought back in court. I called a real estate attorney named Michael Chen, who specialized in HOA disputes. His office was closed for the weekend, but I left a detailed voicemail and sent an email outlining the situation. Monday morning, I got a call back from his paralegal scheduling a consultation for Tuesday afternoon. Meanwhile, the Scottsdale Police Department contacted me Saturday evening with an update. Tyler Miller had confessed to both instances of vandalism. Because he was a minor with no prior record, he would likely be referred to a juvenile diversion program, which meant counseling and community service instead of criminal charges. However, I could still pursue civil action against the parents for damages. "We've also filed a report with Child Protective Services," Officer Santos told me. During our interview with Tyler, he made some concerning statements about his home life. "That's standard procedure, just so you're aware. His parents will probably be contacted by CPS within the next week." I felt a twinge of sympathy for the kid, but it quickly faded when I looked at my paint-splattered house. Whatever was going on in Tyler's home life didn't excuse his behavior, and his parents needed to take responsibility. Sunday afternoon, I was power washing my driveway when Amanda Miller approached. Unlike her husband's confrontational visit, she seemed almost sheepish, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. "Harrison, can we talk?" she asked. I turned off the power washer. "Sure." "Look, I know Tyler messed up. He admitted what he did and we're dealing with it as a family. But did you really need to push this so hard? The police, the report to CPS, all of it. He's just a kid." "Amanda, your son caused over $7,000 in damage to my home. That's not a small thing. And honestly, if you and Greg had taken me seriously the first 2 times I came to you about his behavior, maybe we wouldn't be here." She looked down at her feet. "I know we should have listened. Greg has a temper, and he doesn't like being told what to do, especially about Tyler. He thinks we're being too soft on him as it is. So what do you want from me? We want to handle this privately. No lawyers, no courts. We'll pay for the damages. All of them. We've already gotten estimates from 3 contractors, and we'll cover whatever it costs to fix both sections of siding. We'll also pay any HOA fines you rack up because of this. I studied her carefully. She seemed genuine, but I had learned not to trust easily. I want that in writing. A legal agreement that you'll cover all repair costs, all HOA fines related to this vandalism, and Tyler stays away from my property completely. Done. We'll have our lawyer draw something up. Can we meet tomorrow to go over it? Tuesday. I'm meeting with my attorney Tuesday afternoon. Have your lawyer send the agreement to mine and we'll review it together. I gave her Michael Chen's contact information. Amanda nodded, looking relieved. Thank you. And Harrison, I really am sorry. We should have handled this better from the beginning. After she left, I felt some of the tension ease from my shoulders. If the Millers were willing to pay for everything, that would at least solve the immediate financial problem. But I was still going to pursue this through proper legal channels. I had learned the hard way that verbal agreements meant nothing. My Tuesday consultation with Michael Chen was enlightening. He was a sharp guy in his early 50s who had been practicing HOA law for over 20 years. His office in downtown Scottsdale was lined with law books and framed victories against various homeowner associations. Okay, let me get this straight, he said, reviewing the documents I had brought. Your house was vandalized. You have video proof of the perpetrator. The police have confirmed the kid confessed, and now the HOA is threatening to fine you for the vandalism damage. That's correct, he shook his head. This is Patricia Morrison's neighborhood, isn't it? Desert Bloom Estates. You know her? Oh, I know her. She's been sued 4 times in the last 6 years by homeowners in your development. Twice she's lost, once she settled, and 1 case is still ongoing. The woman has a God complex. He leaned back in his chair. Here's the good news. Arizona law is pretty clear that HOAs cannot penalize homeowners for damage caused by criminal activity if the homeowner is actively working to remedy the situation. You filed a police report. You have insurance involved. You've gotten contractor estimates. You're doing everything right. So they can't fine me. They can try, but it won't hold up if you challenge it. What I recommend is sending them a cease and desist letter outlining the legal protections for crime victims and making it clear that any fines levied will be challenged in court. That usually scares them off. Usually, Patricia Morrison is stubborn. There's a chance she'll push forward anyway, which is when we file an injunction. But honestly, I think a strongly worded letter will do the trick. The HOA's insurance carrier won't want to back them up on something this obviously illegal. He then reviewed the proposed agreement from the Millers' attorney. It was surprisingly comprehensive. The Millers would pay for all siding repairs, including materials and labor. They would reimburse me for the security camera system since I had only purchased it because of Tyler's vandalism. They would cover any HOA fines related to the paint damage. And there was a clause prohibiting Tyler from entering my property for any reason, with financial penalties if he violated it. This is actually a solid agreement, Michael said. They're being very generous, probably because they're scared about the CPS investigation. I'd sign it, but let me make a few small modifications first. He spent 20 minutes marking up the document, adding some clarifying language and tightening up the payment timeline. Okay, I'll send this back to their attorney. If they accept these changes, you should sign it. The Millers accepted the modifications without argument, and by Thursday afternoon I had a fully executed legal agreement guaranteeing they would pay for everything. The relief was enormous. I had been prepared for a long legal battle, but apparently The Millers just wanted this to go away quietly. Michael Chen also sent the cease and desist letter to the HOA on Wednesday. By Friday, I received a terse email from Patricia Morrison stating that the fine notice was being temporarily suspended pending resolution of the vandalism damage. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was good enough for now. The contractor started work on my siding the following Monday. It was a week-long project that involved removing all the damaged panels and installing new ones. The Millers paid the contractor directly, $3,800 for the first section and $4,200 for the second, plus another $1,500 for painting everything to match. They also cut me a check for the $2,000 security system and threw in an extra $500 for my time and trouble. While the work was being done, I started noticing something interesting on my security camera footage. Patricia Morrison drove past my house at least 3 times a day, always slowing down to inspect the work being done. Once, I caught her on camera getting out of her car with her clipboard and taking photos of the contractor's truck. The following Tuesday, I received another notice from the HOA. This time, it was a violation for having a contractor's vehicle parked on the street during work hours. According to some obscure bylaw I had never heard of, all contractor vehicles needed to be parked in the homeowner's driveway, not on the public street. I called Michael Chen. "She's harassing me now," I said, explaining the latest violation. He laughed. "That bylaw was struck down by a judge 3 years ago in a case I handled. It's unenforceable. Just ignore it. If she pushes, I'll send another letter." But Patricia didn't just push. She escalated. Over the next 2 weeks, I received violation notices for my mailbox being too shiny after I had cleaned it, for my garage door being left open for 15 minutes while I unloaded groceries, and for having a wreath on my front door that was apparently not from the pre-approved list of decorative items. Every single notice came with a threat of fines if I didn't comply within arbitrary timeframes. I documented everything, saving every letter and taking photos with timestamps showing how ridiculous the violations were. My mailbox wasn't too shiny. It was just clean. My garage door had been open for a legitimate reason, and the wreath was a simple evergreen decoration that looked identical to wreaths hanging on at least a dozen other doors in the neighborhood. "She's targeting you," Michael Chen confirmed when I showed him the accumulation of notices. "This is harassment, plain and simple. She's mad that you stood up to her on the vandalism fines, and now she's trying to make your life miserable. What can I do about it?" "Well, the nuclear option is to sue the HOA for selective enforcement and harassment. But that's expensive and time-consuming. A better approach might be to go after her position on the board." "How would I do that?" HOA boards are elected by the homeowners. According to your CC and Articus, you have elections every 18 months. The next one is coming up in about 8 weeks. You could run for a board position yourself, or you could campaign to have Patricia removed. The idea of getting involved in HOA politics made me want to stick needles in my eyes, but the alternative was putting up with Patricia's harassment indefinitely. "I'll think about it," I said. As it turned out, I didn't have to think very long. That evening, I was checking my social media when I noticed a post in the Desert Bloom Estates neighborhood Facebook group. A woman named Rebecca Hartman had written a long post detailing her own nightmare experiences with Patricia Morrison, including being fined for having the wrong shade of beige on her window shutters and being threatened with a lien on her property for not mowing her lawn during a week when she had been hospitalized. The post had over 60 comments, and as I scrolled through them, I realized Patricia had been terrorizing the entire neighborhood for years. People were sharing their own stories of ridiculous fines, selective enforcement, and bullying behavior. One guy had been cited for having a basketball hoop in his driveway, even though at least 10 other homes had them. A woman had been fined for her children's toys being visible in her backyard, which apparently violated some aesthetic guideline. I added my own story to the thread, including scanned copies of the ridiculous violation notices I had received. Within an hour, my post had 35 reactions and 20 comments of support. People were angry, and they were ready to do something about it. Rebecca Hartman sent me a private message. "Hey Harrison, I've been trying to organize people to push back against Patricia for over a year, but no one wanted to rock the boat. Your situation might be the catalyst we need. Would you be willing to meet with a few of us to discuss options?" I agreed, and that Saturday afternoon I found myself sitting in Rebecca's living room with 7 other homeowners from Desert Bloom Estates. Rebecca was a sharp woman in her late 30s who worked as a project manager for a tech company. She had spreadsheets, multiple spreadsheets, charts, graphs, a timeline of Patricia Morrison's violations stretching back 5 years. "Here's the situation," Rebecca said, pulling up her presentation on her laptop. "Patricia has been HOA president for 6 years. In that time, she's issued over 300 violation notices to homeowners in this development. That's 300 notices across 80 homes. Some people have never gotten a notice. Others, like Harrison, get them constantly. The pattern suggests selective enforcement based on personal grudges. A man named David spoke up. He was in his 60s, retired military based on his bearing. "I've been fined 12 times in 4 years. 12. My neighbor across the street has identical landscaping and has never been cited once." The difference? His wife is friends with Patricia. Everyone had similar stories. The common thread was that if you challenged Patricia or questioned her authority, you became a target for endless nitpicking violations. If you went along with her and kissed the ring, you were left alone. "The HOA election is in 7 weeks, Rebecca continued. "There are 5 board positions, and 3 of them are up for election this cycle. Patricia's seat is one of them. If we can get 3 reasonable people elected, we can flip the board majority and vote Patricia out as president." "Do we have candidates?" I asked. "I'm running," Rebecca said. "And David here has agreed to run as well. We need one more person willing to put their name forward." She looked directly at me. I shook my head. "I'm not a politician. I'm terrible at this kind of thing." "You don't need to be a politician," David said. "You just need to be someone who gives a damn about fairness and common sense. Based on everything I've heard, you fit the bill." I thought about the past few weeks. The vandalism, the harassment from Patricia, the stress of dealing with lawyers and contractors. I thought about Amanda Miller's sheepish apology and how even the Millers, who had every reason to hate me, had been more reasonable than the HOA president. I thought about all the other people in this neighborhood who were living in fear of arbitrary fines and ridiculous rules. "Okay," I said, "I'll run." The campaign, if you could call it that, was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Rebecca created a Facebook page called Fair HOA Leadership and a simple website outlining our platform. Our message was straightforward: reasonable enforcement of necessary rules, no more harassment or selective targeting, transparency in HOA finances and decision-making, communication with homeowners before issuing fines. Patricia Morrison responded by sending out a mass email to all homeowners accusing us of trying to destroy the neighborhood's property values and turn Desert Bloom Estates into a slum. She claimed that without strict enforcement, people would paint their houses neon colors, park broken-down cars in their yards, and let their properties fall into disrepair. But Patricia had miscalculated. She had spent years making enemies, and now those enemies were motivated. Rebecca organized door-to-door canvassing, and we spent weekends talking to our neighbors. The stories we heard were heartbreaking. An elderly woman had been fined repeatedly for her lawn being uneven because she couldn't afford a landscaping service on her fixed income. A young couple had nearly lost their home to a lien over a dispute about their fence color. A single dad had been cited for his kids' bikes being in the driveway, making him feel like he couldn't let his children play in their own yard. Every person we talked to became a supporter. By the time Election Day arrived, we had commitments from over 60 of the 80 households in the development. The HOA election was held on a Wednesday evening in the community clubhouse. Normally, these meetings drew maybe 15 people, according to Rebecca. This time, 72 homeowners showed up, packing the small meeting room beyond capacity. Patricia stood at the front with her clipboard, her expression tight as she watched people file in. The other 2 current board members flanked her, both looking uncomfortable. The election process was simple. Secret ballot, simple majority wins. When it came time for candidate statements, Patricia went first. She gave a 10-minute speech about her years of service, her commitment to property values, and her vision for a pristine, perfect neighborhood. She made several pointed remarks about troublemakers and people who want to lower our standards. David spoke next, keeping his statement brief and focused on fairness and respect. Rebecca gave an impassioned speech about transparency and community. When it was my turn, I simply told my story. The vandalism, the fines I had received for being a crime victim, and the realization that this could happen to anyone if we didn't stand up for common sense. The votes were counted by a neutral third party, a requirement under the HOA bylaws. When the results were announced, the room erupted in applause. Rebecca had won her seat with 64 votes, David had won his with 61, and I had won mine with 68 votes out of 72 cast. Patricia had received 4 votes. The look on Patricia Morrison's face was something I would never forget. Shock, anger, and disbelief all rolled into one. She stood up, grabbed her clipboard, and walked out of the meeting without saying a word. One of the other board members, a guy named Tom who had always seemed reasonable, called a brief recess. When the meeting reconvened, Tom spoke. Given the election results, I think we need to restructure the board leadership. I'd like to nominate Rebecca Hartman for HOA president. The vote was unanimous among the 5 board members. Rebecca was now president, David was voted in as treasurer, and I became the secretary. The other 2 positions went to Tom and a woman named Sarah who had been on the board for years, but had always been outvoted by Patricia's allies. Our first official act was to review and rescind 17 outstanding fines that had been issued for questionable violations. My mailbox fine was eliminated. So was the wreath violation. We set up a new process requiring that before any fine was issued, a warning letter had to be sent first, and the homeowner had 30 days to respond. We also established an appeals committee so people could challenge violations they felt were unfair. Over the next month, we completely overhauled how the HOA operated. We created a transparent budget that was posted online for all homeowners to see. We established regular office hours where people could come discuss concerns. We updated the bylaws to remove dozens of outdated and ridiculous rules, like the one about contractor vehicles and the absurdly specific requirements about approved wreath styles. Patricia Morrison put her house up for sale 6 weeks after the election. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had moved to a gated community in Phoenix where she could be as controlling as she wanted without consequence. Good riddance. As for the Millers, Tyler completed his juvenile diversion program, which included 60 hours of community service and counseling. I actually ran into him at the local library, where he was volunteering for his service hours. He was shelving books and looked up when he saw me, his face going pale. "Mr. Vance," he said quietly, "I'm really sorry about what I did to your house." I studied him for a moment. He looked different than the cocky kid I had caught on camera, more subdued, maybe even a little humbled. "Did you mean it to go that far?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not at first. The first time was just being stupid with my friends. They dared me to do it. But then you called my parents and my dad yelled at me, and I got mad and decided to do it again. I didn't think about how much it would cost or how it would affect you. I was just thinking about myself." "Well, you learned an expensive lesson, and so did your parents." "Yeah." He hesitated, then said, "The CPS thing helped, actually. My parents are in counseling now, family therapy. It's weird, but things are better at home. My dad doesn't yell as much." I felt a strange mixture of emotions. I hadn't wanted to destroy this kid's life or his family. I had just wanted him to face consequences for his actions. Maybe, in a weird way, everything had worked out. "Keep up the good work here," I said, gesturing at the library, "and stay out of trouble." "Yes, sir." My house siding looked perfect now. The new panels pristine and painted to match exactly. The security cameras remained active, though they mostly just recorded squirrels and the occasional delivery driver. I had kept copies of all the footage from the vandalism, both as a reminder and as evidence if I ever needed it for legal purposes. One Saturday morning in late October, about 5 months after the whole ordeal had started, I was drinking coffee on my back patio when Greg Miller appeared at the fence line. I tensed, remembering his angry confrontation months earlier, but his body language was different this time. Less aggressive. "Harrison," he called out, "you got a minute?" I walked over to the fence. "What's up, Greg?" He rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable. "I wanted to thank you. That wasn't what I had expected. Thank me for not letting us sweep this under the rug, for making us deal with it properly. The CPS investigation was hell, but it forced Amanda and me to look at how we were parenting Tyler. We were making excuses for him, letting him get away with stuff, because it was easier than disciplining him. We were fighting all the time, and Tyler was caught in the middle. Greg, I didn't call CPS. The police did that as part of their investigation. I know, but if you hadn't pushed the issue, none of it would have happened. Tyler wouldn't have gotten the help he needed, and our family would still be a mess." He paused. "The kid's doing better now. His grades are up. He's joined the robotics club at school, and Amanda and I are actually talking to each other instead of just yelling." I didn't know what to say. In my mind, I had been the aggrieved party, the victim standing up for myself. I hadn't thought about the possibility that forcing consequences might actually help the Miller family. "I'm glad things worked out," I finally said. "Look, I know we're not going to be best friends or anything, but I wanted you to know that I respect what you did. You stood your ground, and you were right to do it. If Tyler ever gives you any trouble again, you come straight to me. No more of that boys will be boys bullshit." We shook hands over the fence, and something shifted. Not quite forgiveness, but maybe understanding. Sometimes doing the right thing means making people uncomfortable, even when it would be easier to let things slide. The HOA continued to improve under new leadership. Rebecca was an excellent president, organized and fair. We implemented a neighborhood beautification program that was actually helpful rather than punitive, offering low-interest loans to homeowners who needed help with major repairs. We organized community events like a summer barbecue and a Halloween party. People actually started attending HOA meetings because they wanted to, not because they were scared of fines. I settled into a routine. Work during the week, HOA secretary duties on evenings and weekends, and occasional monitoring of my security cameras just to make sure everything stayed peaceful. The cameras paid for themselves in unexpected ways. I caught a package thief on video and helped the police track down someone who had been stealing deliveries from multiple homes. I also recorded footage of a hit-and-run accident that damaged a neighbor's mailbox, giving them the license plate number they needed for their insurance claim. In December, almost 8 months after the vandalism, I received a Christmas card from the Millers. Inside was a family photo of Greg, Amanda, and Tyler, all smiling genuinely. There was a handwritten note from Amanda. "Harrison, thank you for being the neighbor we needed, even when we didn't deserve it. Tyler is doing well and wanted to include a note for you. Wishing you a peaceful holiday season." Tyler's note was on a separate card, written in neat teenage handwriting. "Mr. Vance, I know sorry isn't enough for what I did. I've been volunteering at the Boys and Girls Club teaching younger kids about making good choices. I talk about what I did and how it affected you and my family. I hope that by helping other kids, I can make up for some of the harm I caused. Thank you for giving me a chance to do better. Tyler." I put the cards on my refrigerator, held in place by a magnet shaped like the state of Arizona. Sometimes justice isn't just about punishment. Sometimes it's about creating accountability that leads to real change. As the year wound down, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. A year ago, I had been living in fear of my HOA, tiptoeing around arbitrary rules and trying to avoid Patricia Morrison's wrath. Now, I was part of the solution, helping to create an HOA that actually served the community instead of terrorizing it. The paint damage that had started everything was long gone, replaced by pristine siding that gleamed in the Arizona sunshine. The security cameras kept watch, silent sentinels that had proven their worth. And most importantly, I had learned that standing up for yourself, even when it's uncomfortable and difficult, is always the right choice. Michael Chen called me in mid-January with some interesting news. "Remember Patricia Morrison? She's facing a lawsuit." "What kind of lawsuit?" 3 former homeowners from a different development where she's now on the HOA board are suing her personally for harassment. Apparently, she hasn't learned her lesson. But here's the interesting part. They're using the documentation we compiled about her behavior at Desert Bloom Estates as evidence of a pattern. Your case, along with Rebecca's and several others, is helping prove that she has a history of abuse of power. Will they win? Based on what I've seen, probably. And it might finally get her banned from serving on HOA boards. There's a state law that allows judges to do that in extreme cases. I felt a grim satisfaction at that. Patricia had spent years making people's lives miserable. It was only fair that she finally faced real consequences. In February, almost exactly a year after the vandalism had occurred, the Desert Bloom Estates HOA held its annual meeting. It was the first one under our new leadership, and we wanted to make it special. We rented a bigger venue, provided refreshments, and actually made it enjoyable. Rebecca gave a year-in-review presentation showing what we had accomplished. 17 rescinded fines, saving homeowners over $30,000 in total. 23 updated bylaws that removed outdated and unfair rules. A new website with transparent financials. A community improvement fund that had already helped 5 families make necessary repairs to their homes. And most importantly, 0 complaints about harassment or selective enforcement. At the end of the meeting, an elderly gentleman named Arthur stood up. He had lived in Desert Bloom Estates for over a decade and had been one of Patricia's frequent targets. "I just want to say," he began, his voice shaking slightly, that for the first time in years, I actually enjoy living in this neighborhood. I'm not afraid of getting a violation notice every time I step outside. I'm not worried about losing my home over the color of my fence or the height of my grass. You three, he gestured at Rebecca, David, and me, you've given us back our community. Thank you. The room erupted in applause, and I felt a swell of pride. We had done something good here, something that mattered. After the meeting, as I was helping clean up, Tyler Miller appeared with his parents. He was carrying a large framed photograph. Mr. Vance, my photography class had an assignment to capture something that represents change or transformation. I took this picture of your house. He handed me the frame. The photograph was surprisingly artistic. He had captured my home at sunset, the warm light highlighting the perfect siding, with dramatic shadows and composition that made it look almost magazine-worthy. The assignment was to write about the photo too, Tyler continued, pulling out a folded paper. I wrote about how your house represents how facing consequences can lead to positive change. Not just the physical change of repairing the siding, but the change in my family and even in the neighborhood with the HOA stuff. My teacher said it was the best essay in the class. I wanted you to have both. I took the essay and read it. Tyler had been honest about his mistakes, thoughtful about the impact of his actions, and mature in his reflection on what he had learned. This wasn't the same punk kid who had grinned while spray painting my house. This is really good, Tyler. Thank you. No, thank you. For not giving up on me being able to do better. After they left, I hung the photograph in my home office, right where I could see it from my desk. It was a reminder that sometimes the hardest moments lead to the best outcomes. The vandalism had cost me money and stress, but it had also pushed me to install security cameras that made my home safer. It had forced me to stand up to an abusive HOA president, which had ultimately improved life for everyone in the neighborhood. And it had created accountability for a troubled kid who needed it, helping him and his family get the help they needed. Spring arrived in Scottsdale with its usual spectacular wildflower blooms. The neighborhood looked beautiful, and for the first time since I had moved in, I could actually enjoy it without constantly worrying about HOA violations. I spent weekends working in my yard, planting flowers that I actually liked rather than ones from some arbitrary approved list. I painted my front door a deep, rich blue that complemented my house's cream siding perfectly. Under the old regime, Patricia would have thrown a fit. Under the new rules, as long as the color wasn't fluorescent or offensive, homeowners had freedom to personalize their homes. The security cameras continued to do their job, mostly recording peaceful suburban life. Occasionally, I would review footage if I heard something unusual at night or if a neighbor asked me to check if I had captured something. The system had become a neighborhood resource. When someone's dog went missing, I checked my cameras and found footage of which direction it had run. When there was a minor fender bender on our street, my cameras provided the angles the drivers needed for their insurance claims. One evening in April, I was having dinner on my back patio when my phone buzzed with a notification from Michael Chen. He had sent an article from a Phoenix legal blog. The headline read, "Former HOA President Banned from Board Service After Pattern of Harassment." I opened the article and read about Patricia Morrison's complete downfall. The judge had ruled in favor of the homeowners suing her, awarding them significant damages for emotional distress and harassment. More importantly, the judge had issued an injunction prohibiting Patricia from serving on any HOA board in Arizona for a period of 10 years. The ruling cited a pattern of abuse of power, selective enforcement, and retaliatory behavior spanning multiple communities and nearly a decade. The article quoted several homeowners, including one from Desert Bloom Estates. Rebecca Hartman had provided testimony about Patricia's reign of terror, and our documentation had been instrumental in establishing the pattern. Reading it, I felt a sense of closure. Patricia wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else for a long time. As summer approached, the Desert Bloom Estates HOA continued to thrive under reasonable leadership. We had transformed from one of the most complained about associations in Scottsdale to what the local real estate agents called a model community. Property values had actually increased because people wanted to live in a neighborhood with a fair and functional HOA rather than a dysfunctional one run by a tyrant. I had learned so much over the past year. I had learned that security cameras were worth every penny, not just for catching criminals, but for protecting yourself from false accusations. I had learned that standing up to bullies, whether they're neighbors or HOA presidents, was necessary even when it was uncomfortable. I had learned that sometimes the hardest conflicts could lead to positive change for everyone involved. Most importantly, I had learned that I was stronger than I thought. A year ago, I had been a recently divorced guy trying to avoid conflict and just live quietly. Now, I was an HOA board member helping to run a community, someone people came to with problems because they trusted me to be fair and reasonable. Tyler Miller continued to do well. He had made honor roll for 2 consecutive semesters and had won a regional robotics competition with his school team. Occasionally, I would see him in his yard working on projects or shooting baskets with his dad. He always waved when he saw me, and I always waved back. We weren't friends exactly, but we had an understanding built on accountability and growth. Greg and Amanda seemed happier too. I would see them taking evening walks together, actually talking and laughing. Whatever issues they had been dealing with, the family therapy seemed to be working. Sometimes I wondered if Tyler's vandalism had been a cry for help, a desperate attempt to get attention in a chaotic home. If so, my refusal to let it slide had inadvertently gotten him and his family the intervention they needed. The legal agreement we had signed remained in force, though it had never needed to be enforced. Tyler had stayed away from my property, and the Millers had paid for everything as promised. My home looked better than it ever had, the new siding still pristine, the cameras ever watchful. In late June, Rebecca organized a neighborhood block party to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of our new HOA board. It was a huge success, with over 60 families attending. We had food trucks, a bounce house for kids, and a live band playing classic rock covers. People were laughing and socializing, enjoying their community in a way that had been impossible under Patricia Morrison's oppressive leadership. David took the makeshift stage during a break between bands. "I want to recognize someone special tonight," he announced. "Harrison Vance here is the reason we're all standing here enjoying ourselves. His willingness to stand up to an unjust system, to demand accountability, and to put himself out there as a candidate, it inspired all of us to demand better." "Harrison, could you come up here?" Reluctantly, I made my way to the stage, feeling self-conscious as people applauded. David handed me the microphone. "I don't really have a speech prepared," I said, "but I want to say that none of this was just me. It was Rebecca's organization, David's courage, and all of you being willing to demand change. A year ago, I was angry about paint on my siding and scared of HOA fines. Today, I'm proud to be part of this community. That transformation happened because we all worked together. So thank you. Thank you for trusting us to lead, and thank you for making Desert Bloom Estates a place worth living." The applause was genuine and warm. As I stepped off the stage, Multiple people came up to shake my hand or share their own stories of how the past year had changed their lives. It was overwhelming in the best way possible. Later that night, after the party had wound down and I was back home, I sat on my patio with a cold beer and thought about everything. The vandalism that had started this whole journey seemed like ancient history now, a catalyst that had set so many things in motion. Without those red and blue splatters of paint, I never would have installed security cameras. Without the cameras, I wouldn't have had proof to hold the Millers accountable. Without that confrontation, I wouldn't have attracted Patricia Morrison's harassment. Without her harassment, I wouldn't have gotten involved in HOA politics. And without getting involved, Rebecca and David and I wouldn't have transformed this community into something better. It was funny how one act of vandalism by a troubled kid had rippled outward, creating change that affected dozens of families. Tyler Miller had unwittingly started a revolution in Desert Bloom Estates. I hoped he understood that when he was older, that sometimes our mistakes can lead to positive outcomes we never intended. My phone buzzed with a text from Zara Coleman, a woman I had been seeing for a few months. We had met at a coffee shop when she noticed me working on HOA documents and joked about whether I was dealing with difficult neighbors. When I told her the whole story, she had been fascinated. Zara was a freelance journalist who wrote about community issues, and she had even published an article about HOA reform featuring our story. "Great speech tonight," her text read. "Want to grab dinner tomorrow and celebrate?" I smiled and typed back a confirmation. Life was good. My home was secure and beautiful. My neighborhood was thriving. I had found meaningful work in community service that I had never expected to enjoy. And I had met someone who actually appreciated my tendency to stand up for what was right rather than finding it annoying. As I sat there in the warm June evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, I thought about how much can change in a year. How fear can transform into courage. How conflict can lead to growth. How a community can heal when people decide to stand up for fairness and common sense. The security cameras recorded everything silently, their red lights blinking steadily in the growing darkness. They had captured the vandalism that started everything, and now they stood guard over a peaceful home in a peaceful neighborhood. Sometimes the best investment you can make is in protecting yourself, not just from threats, but from the uncertainty of not knowing what really happened. I raised my beer in a silent toast to the paint-splattered kid who had accidentally improved dozens of lives by forcing a reckoning with accountability and fairness. Then I went inside, checked the camera feeds one last time out of habit, and turned in for the night, content in the knowledge that tomorrow would be another good day in Desert Bloom Estates. The story of the vandalism, the cameras, and the HOA revolution became something of a legend in Scottsdale. Michael Chen used it as a case study in his HOA law seminars. Rebecca wrote a guide for homeowners dealing with abusive associations, featuring our experience prominently. And I occasionally got emails from people in other states asking for advice on standing up to their own HOA problems. Every time I told the story, I emphasized the same points. Document everything. Know your rights. Stand up for yourself even when it's uncomfortable. And sometimes, the worst situations can lead to the best outcomes if you handle them with integrity and determination. The paint was long gone, replaced by perfect siding, but the lessons remained, etched into my life as permanently as those red and blue streaks had once stained my home. I had learned that I was capable of more than I thought. That communities could change for the better when good people decided to get involved. And that sometimes, The universe sends you challenges specifically because you're the person who needs to face them. As autumn arrived again, marking more than a year since that first splash of red paint, I found myself actually grateful for what had happened. Not grateful for the vandalism itself, but grateful for the journey it had started. Without it, I would still be living in fear of Patricia Morrison. Tyler Miller would still be a troubled kid heading down a dangerous path. Greg and Amanda Miller would still be struggling in their marriage, and dozens of families in Desert Bloom estates would still be suffering under an oppressive HOA regime. Instead, we had all grown, all changed, all become better versions of ourselves because someone threw paint on my house, and I decided not to let it slide. That was the real story, not the vandalism or the cameras or even the HOA battle. The real story was about refusing to accept injustice, standing up for what was right, and discovering that one person really could make a difference if they were willing to try. I kept Tyler's photograph hanging in my office, a daily reminder of transformation and redemption. Whenever I faced a difficult decision or felt like taking the easy path, I looked at that image of my house and remembered everything it represented. The damage that had been repaired, the accountability that had been enforced, the community that had been transformed, the kid who had gotten a second chance, the families who had been freed from harassment. That was legacy. That was meaning. And it had all started with paint on my siding and a decision to install cameras and hold people accountable. Sometimes the smallest decisions create the biggest ripples, changing lives in ways you never imagined possible.